Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this SMG webinar. My name is Mehul Joshi. I'm a senior partner at SMG and head of the leadership practice. I'm delighted to be the host for this webinar on a subject which is front and center in the minds of a lot of organizations. Let's start off with the general purpose of these webinars. These lunch and learn webinars is to create a forum to facilitate expertise, insights, and perspectives that help leaders and organizations respond effectively to shared challenges and ultimately to emerge stronger from this current environment of uncertainty. In today's Lunch and Learn webinar, we are focusing on the issue that's been called the Great Resignation, the Great Attrition, and it's to assess the scale and impact of this global phenomenon here in this part of the world, to explore the underlying causes and identify what can be done, importantly, to engage and retain your top talent. So in the agenda today, I'm going to take a moment to introduce you to our fantastic panel that we've assembled for this Lunch and Learn webinar. We're going to start off by doing a bit of a reality check. Is this as big a problem as we think it is? Then we'll look at the drivers of attrition, because whether it's an issue or not for your organization, it's important to get under the hood and understand what is it that drives engagement and the flip side of that, attrition. And then finally, what are the key factors that will help attract and engage the best talent that's out there? Hopefully we'll have time at the end for questions and answers, but let's start off with an introduction to our panel. Now, one of the reasons each of these panel members was selected for this particular webinar is that they are with, or previously were with, organizations that LinkedIn considers to be the most engaging and attractive organizations in Australia. So they're all in LinkedIn's top 25. Starting off with Bernadette Bruton, who's the Executive General Manager, Culture, Leadership and Learning at National Australia Bank. Welcome to the panel, Bernadette. Great to see you. And you're very much bringing a global perspective to this conversation, aren't you?
I am. So I have been in Australia just over a year, and I've been in Melbourne just under a year. I spent a couple of months in Sydney before moving to Melbourne. But my previous jobs have all been global, and they included insurance, a global organization called Aviva. I spent 3 years there, but my background is very definitely banking. I spent 16 years at Barclays, and after the financial crisis was also involved in partnering and helping the Northern Rock Bank, which was the first to suffer in the global financial crisis. It was the poster child of that in the UK. So I worked with them, getting them back on their feet and ready for sale. And I've done a couple of other stints in global organisations, including telecoms and technology, which was British Telecom, who some of you have heard of, and also Fujitsu, which I'm sure everybody on the call will have heard of. So yeah, global person, very British accent, apologies. And enjoying my time in the most locked down city in the world. Who knew?
Yeah, well, Bernadette, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the British accent. So you're in very good company.
I know.
But you've been in Australia for a little over a year, but seen very little of it. I mean, what an extraordinary time to make a major...
Yes, I think everybody should get the violins out. We came over for this massive adventure. We were going to see this most amazing country. And we've seen the Mornington Peninsula and the Great Ocean Road is about as much as we have been able to see. So my adventure, my ideas of getting to the Barrier Reef, to the top of Queensland, into the Whitsundays and those beautiful beaches, over to Perth, up to Darwin, over to Ayers Rock, or not happening.
Or delayed. Soon happening.
I hope delayed.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pierre de Villiers, and thank you, Bernadette. Looking forward to the conversation. Now, Pierre, I mean, your name sounds like it's a very global perspective. I'm sure it is. You've had a bit of a global career as well, and everything. People at Allianz. Allianz keep winning awards for what you've been doing in terms of people engagement. What's the secret sauce?
Yeah, very kind of you to point that out. I think for us, it's been about really making sure that we're giving a lot of time and effort to what really matters to our people. So we know from our engagement surveys and pulses that we conduct that diversity and inclusion is really a pillar of what people really value about our organization. And so, even through our response to the Royal Commission, we chose to continue to invest in this as a critical pillar of the people experience. And even just making sure that we're baking, conversations around inclusion, not just into our culture, the work that we're doing there, but also with our uplift of leadership capability. So, we try to do things in quite an integrated way that makes it nice and simple and easy for our people, but also investing in the things that really count.
Yeah, fantastic, Pierre. Because obviously, what we want to do in this conversation is really engage, in a conversation on engagement. What keeps people attracted to individual leaders and to organizations. So looking forward to that conversation, Pierre. And finally, Lynn, your previous employer, Westpac, you were for many years the head of executive talent at Westpac. Again, one of the LinkedIn's top 25 companies in Australia now. I'm thrilled to be able to say that you are part of the SMG team as a career transition specialist, and you have many years of expertise in that area, don't you?
Oh, thank you, Michal. Thanks for inviting me to the conversation. It's great to be with Bernadette, Pierre today and with yourself. Look, I had the really great honour and privilege to be with Westpac for 40 years. I'm just going to say it out loud and proud. I know that is a really long time, but I've come to terms with it. It's been a wonderful ride, and I joined as a graduate and have really spent the last probably 25 to 30 years working in the executive development space, and particularly around succession management, and more recently very deeply into career development for senior leaders and for emerging leaders as well. So it's been a very interesting, wonderful learning experience, and I've had the privilege of working closely with many senior leaders over many years and seen them come and grow and leave and often come back as well.
So we're talking, Lynn, about the subject of the great attrition or the great resignation. Do you see it as a new phenomenon, or have we always been kind of on the trajectory of it being much more difficult to hire and retain talent?
Look, I think lots of people have different views on this, Michal, but I think we're actually on the cusp of something much bigger. I think we're hurtling down the runway of huge talent movement, and actually we're almost at that point of liftoff, and if organisations aren't addressing this now, the attrition, the resignation, then I think it may be soon too late. We'll reach the point of no return, and companies will be missing out. In fact, I have a way of thinking about it that it's very much around the great retention, and that even may be the bigger challenge for the war for talent.
Okay, well, let's pick up on that theme throughout this conversation. Let's start off with looking at some of the data. There's a lot of research that's been done, in particular in the last few months, around retention and attraction. This is from McKinsey, 5,774 respondents in Australia, Canada, Singapore, the UK, and the US, so highly relevant. They're saying 40% of employees said they are at least somewhat likely to quit in the next 3 to 6 months. Now, I mentioned that in these Lunch and Learn webinars, we want it very much to be a conversation. We want to include each of you that's participating. Certainly in a live webinar, if you're listening to the recording, you probably won't be able to participate so much. But I want to start off with a poll question, which I'm going to ask each of you. The poll will appear in just a moment. To what extent might this be true for your organization, that 40% of employees are going to quit in the next 6 months or so? Very true, somewhat true, not true, hard to gauge. If you're listening to the recording, you won't see the data coming up, but please do think about that question. And I'm going to pose that question, first of all, to Bernadette. So this is a sense check at NAB. How true is that for National Australia Bank?
So I think I have two views on this. My first view is what we're experiencing in National Australia Bank is actually over the last year, we have seen motivation levels and commitment levels go up, which is really interesting. So So there's some data that's at odds. But the second thing I have seen is that we definitely have pockets where it's much harder to hold on to talent. And we have seen that in digital and data scientists in particular. I don't think we're alone. I think that is a global phenomenon now. And with our borders closed, but with that part of fintech rising, at a sort of rate of knots, that is one of the big talent concerns that we have in fintechs and in banks more generally. But interestingly, that the fact that I am holding on to as a bit of hope is that the motivation in our organization has gone up over the last 12 months. I think that's interesting that we have some paradoxical information that we have in the system at the moment.
What's behind the motivation levels going up?
Well, one of the things that we have invested in quite heavily over the last year is leadership. So we have got a key program that we've run virtually. It wasn't designed virtually, it was designed face-to-face, that we all sort of like pedaled very fast to get into a virtual environment. But it's touching every single leader in our business. It's quite consistent, has consistent language, consistent models, but it also touches everything that is really important to hold on to engagement with your employees. And of course, the relationship with your people leader is so critical to how you feel about your personal purpose and your motivation, and also your level of autonomy. So I think that investment at the same time as we've been in a pandemic has probably helped us more than we originally set out to do. So again, good leaders create good capability, great clarity, and help with motivation. So that, I think that might have helped us along the way.
Fantastic.
Can I just ask a quick question about that? Sorry, because it's really interesting. What are you finding in terms of well-being with your leaders, and how are they actually showing that they genuinely care about their direct reports' well-being?
So I think part of the uplift in that experience of working for NAB is definitely flexibility. So that ability, especially for carers, especially for women, and especially for people with children, they're finding the flexibility of working from home has helped. That is at stark contrast to others who are desperate to get into the office and to stay connected, but it's definitely helped in some areas. That's one. The second thing is we have done pulse surveys all the way through COVID and checked in on well-being, and that's then enabled us to sort of have mini campaigns or mini course corrections throughout the year to either help with giving people access or just changing the conversation. So it's a great call out, Lynn. I think well-being has been so critical. And again, the relationship with your boss is such a big one in terms of compassion and empathy with your circumstances. There's definitely a connection.
I wonder if there's that shared vulnerability that's really bringing that more to life.
Yeah. With the kids coming into camera, the backdrop, I've got a NAB backdrop, but sometimes I don't have a NAB backdrop, and you can just see the state of my office, which is the shared vulnerability for a control freak like me. So yes, I think the reality of Zoom has done some other things as well.
Yeah, what's your perspective from Allianz?
Yeah, we've got some pretty similar themes. We were talking, Bernadette and I, the other day, and I think we had a lot of similarities in what we focused on. But absolutely, I think that, this idea of people, I think, feeling safe, feeling a bit of autonomy and the ability to actually choose to work from home, even when we had that patch, and for some of our offices that are still open elsewhere outside of Sydney, where people can also have that choice around, where they want to work and how they want to do that. Is really important to us. And we were on the flexibility journey well before COVID. So it's certainly something which for us has been a great opportunity to test the boundaries of that. And I think the humanistic side, our executives are very regularly will pitch up to meetings wearing a hoodie or something more relaxed. And I think that also puts our people at ease and makes them really feel that they can just focus on, juggling all the different things that they have. But certainly focusing on, where do we think our engagement's going, or where do we think our people are sitting in all of this? We also had a huge boost in engagement, but I think what's starting to filter through now is pockets of exhaustion, or where people are starting to get a bit burnt out. So that's really the thing that we want to focus on. And so, we've been spending some time with leaders as individuals, as themselves, as being someone that's potentially feeling burnt out, and working out strategies around that. Because ultimately the multiplier effect that they have through the organization and their ability to support their teams. But you got to put the oxygen mask on first for yourself. So like I say, we've had some really great productivity motivation, but I think we are getting to that burnout phase that we're monitoring quite closely.
And Pierre, when do you know? I mean, burnout it's an interesting phenomenon. How do leaders know when someone is burnt out?
Yeah, it is a good one. I think we spoke about this at length. We actually ran a session with all of our most senior sort of leaders, and we had roundtable conversations, and we spoke about it at length. It can often be really small things. People who would typically have the camera on, maybe you're not doing it for a couple of days, and it's small things where you just notice really small pieces of behavior. So to Bernadette's point around, and Lynn was also saying about the relationship with your leader, it's that personal connection and just knowing your people. And so we've helped people put some strategies in place, but it's really about also creating space within a virtual workday for non-work activity, and again just monitoring people's responses to that, because ultimately you're not having those water cooler conversations and there's other interactions that sort of make work a bit more holistic, and give you that more rounded experience of connecting with the people you work with.
It's a real paradox, isn't it, this flexible work paradox, where people want flexibility to be able to work anywhere, but at the same time, I think our employees are feeling the disconnect and they're really missing conversations, and that is a serious issue if they're not getting them, and a real concern on the burnout scale.
I do think it's a time where we're learning more than anything. So this is a moment for learning and absorbing and being curious and asking questions. I was reading over the weekend about culture and context, and working from home was a particular topic I was interested in terms of what that does in organizations. And I read some research. It's banking, so apologies, it was a banking piece of research I was doing. And they were saying, in terms of performance and productivity and health, they looked at two trading desks, one where lots of people work from the office and lots of people work from home, and the performance was very different in those two, and it was better in the office. And what they did actually was anthropologists that were looking at this. Well, why is that? What's humanly is going on? As sort of anthropologist researchers, they were curious about this sort of disconnect. And they realized that it was what they called incidental information exchange. It was bits of information that you didn't know that you needed to know in order to do your job more effectively, which was just those sort of conversations that are going on when you're sat next to each other and you're sharing information. You don't actually know how important that information is. And I just love the phrase, that incidental information exchange. And I think that sort of learning that we do, this sort of stuff that's going to come out, is going to help us as we start to think about how are we going to be more flexible or attend to flexibility, as Lynn suggested, as organizations and as leaders. So I just think there's a lot to learn, and we will continue to sort of make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, get more data in, look at the context of that data and respond again. So it's going to be fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Go ahead, Lynn.
I was just going to say, sorry, Mia, I think that's really interesting, Bernadette, and I suspect we've come a long way in the last 12 months or so, but I think our radar is going to have to be really attuned to this hybrid flexible work for people who may be seen as the haves and have-nots, for those who are in the office more than others. Potentially being excluded from incidental information can be really risky, and there may be even cohorts of people, particularly I'm thinking about Gen Z, and those who are in that working age group of about 18 to 25, they could be at risk as a cohort if we don't ensure that they're energised, and they in particular need to stay connected. And if any of us have got children or young adults in that age cohort as I have, you can really see that during the lockdown periods.
Yeah, I agree.
I think, there was certainly a light bulb moment for me with that phrase, incidental information exchange. It's like, that's exactly what it is. And I'm sure light bulbs will have gone off for some of you in the audience as well. And thank you for your participation. I want to share the response to the poll that we launched just a few short minutes ago. And for those of you who are listening to the recording, to what extent might this be true that 40% of employees are really seriously thinking about quitting? 20% said, yeah, that's very true in our organization. 42% said somewhat true. 9% said not true. And 29% said hard to gauge. Love the dogs in the background, always. I make a personal request. I actually got a cavoodle in the last year. And that's, she's really seen, her name's Ruby, and she's seen me through, helped me see me through lockdown. So please, bring on the barking. That's what I say. So back to the polls. Bernadette, 29%, a third of our respondents are saying it's hard to gauge whether someone's leaving or not. How do you find that information out if it's hard to gauge?
That's where I am, I think. So until we get back to work, until we start getting into a slightly different, and I hate this phrase, but a little bit more normal, it's really difficult to predict. So I'm seeing all the data, and McKinsey aren't the only one that's producing this sort of data. But I don't know whether it is contextual in terms of our general tiredness for the circumstances we've lived, or whether it's really going to happen. As I said earlier, I have seen it in some pockets of capability, but I think it is really hard to gauge. And as we come out and we return to the office, Sydney's back today. I think that's where our two dominant areas are Melbourne and Sydney. I think it'd be very interesting to see what happens. So I'm more with these difficult to gauge as at the moment, other than the pockets that I mentioned earlier.
Lynn, one of the aspects of the research is that one of the reasons that it's hard to gauge is that people aren't incrementally leaving a position to go to another position. Typically that creates a longitudinal transition. They're deciding to quit with nothing to go to. Is that surprising?
Look, probably 6 months ago, I might have said yes, but the current circumstances have changed my view. And I actually think there's a little bit of a march towards freedom, that some people are just saying everything has been so different. I'm going to actually back myself and take a risk. And I'm just going to put myself out there and try and do it. So, I think Bernadette's call, from her perspective, hard to gauge makes complete sense. But in the background, even though it's hard to gauge, and I know Pierre and Bernadette and their organisations will be doing this, we have to have all the systems, processes, policy, tools in place for those who are saying, well, I am going to just take this risk and go. Or for those who are saying, I really want to stay in the organisation, but, to engage me and motivate me, how are you going to help me do this?
Yeah.
And I think, just to build on what you're saying there, Lynn, I think people's, your company's employer brand is right out there, right? So people don't have to have a friend necessarily that works at Allianz or NAB or wherever it might be to get a sense of what that organization's like. If you are, have a decent employer brand, people know what you're all about. It's not very hard to work out, well, what am I getting within my own organization, and how does that stack up against organization's view on diversity and inclusion, what kind of leadership development you're offering, and all those other kinds of things that now I think people actually have choice. So it's this idea of empowerment and the ability to go, I'm going to back myself here. And we had a conversation, this group, as we were talking about the session, about the shallow talent pools. And I think that's another key factor that's driving this whole thing, which is very front of mind for us. So whether it's your digital and data type of skills, which I think everyone's fishing in the same pool, whether it's Google or anyone who's on this call, we're all fighting for the same talent. But I also think what's quite interesting from our point of view is this real explosion of fintech in Sydney and Melbourne, I'm sure, very, very popular. But what that's doing to even skill sets like human resources, where these organizations are going through multiple rounds of funding, they're scaling up, they're hiring people into the market, and they're looking for talent. And so that is, especially with closed borders for the next extended while, I think that there's going to there's people have choice, and there's certainly some good opportunities out there that are genuinely career defining for some people.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Pierre, about choice. And I think, your attraction policies are going to have to be pretty good. And I'll do a small shameless plug here for my previous employer, Westpac. But just recently, for example, they've increased the amount of paid parental leave and, enhancements like paid parental leave entitlements for premature birth and wellbeing days and things like that. All of those actually mean a lot to people, and particularly as we're marching to freedom, as I said, with flexibility, people are wanting to see an organisation who will offer these things.
So here's a question from Jeremy Nichols in the chat, which I'll put to you, Bernadette. Are we seeing trends in data around the world on what organisations are experiencing with employee mindsets and behaviours as they come back to the office? They're ahead of us in the UK and United States, for example. And we're just emerging from lockdown. I mean, this is we did have a false start earlier this year, but now we're behind the curve. I mean, presumably you still stay in touch with your colleagues in the UK.
I do.
Is there anything we can learn from their experience?
So I think they're still learning as well. So there isn't an answer. So everybody is still learning and adjusting. And they're adjusting to flexibility. And as Lynn has said, there's both flexibility of location and flexibility of schedule or time. So, and that is a growing expectation of people now. We've proved we can work in a very, very different way. So there's a growing expectation of employees around that. The second thing is what is the world of work in the office? And how does that work most effectively, both for individuals and for the business? So you see some organizations taking it very seriously and focusing that on collaboration or cross-boundary working, etc. And then you have other areas where they're seeing the proximity of the work is critical to productivity, and the proximity of people is critical to productivity. So I think it's going to be a bit of horses for courses. So depending on the nature of work, the nature of your customer, the nature of your colleagues and what their expectation is of their careers, you're going to have lots of different models and many more different models than we have been used to in the past. So that's what I'm hearing from my sort of European counterparts. But everybody is learning and making mistakes and then course correcting at the same time. The one constant, though, I would say throughout it all is listening. So making sure that there isn't too much of a disconnect between your frontline colleagues and the executives, that there is a very good level of feedback throughout all of those. And we do know that there is a tendency for those two areas to be quite disconnected. So the listening strategies that we employ, both formally but informally, is going to be critical to managing expectations as an employer and as colleagues.
Well, that's a perfect segue into what we're looking at next. But before we do, a question for you, Pierre. Has the relationship between employer and employee fundamentally changed? Has the power balance shifted?
Yeah, it's like you read my mind. That was really what I was next point I was going to make is I actually do think it has changed, and we've actually acknowledged that at Allianz. I think previously, your hybrid working, your ability to work flexibly was often a leader's prerogative and what the leader preferred. And so decisions would get made around how much flexibility there was based on how often the leader wanted people in the office or not. And if you think about it now, even people who've been keen to come back in the office, I've certainly experienced it myself, and I've seen people write about, why the hell am I here if I'm just going to sit on Zoom calls all day? I might as well be at home. It's far more comfortable. So it's not just about people have their choice and they know they can work from home, but also it's around really adopting really different ways of working. So thinking quite carefully about, well, if we are going to be in the office, what does that look like? What's the most valuable types of working that we can do there? But also, again, I keep on coming back to the inclusiveness of it, but how do you actually make it productive when, at least one person probably is going to be dialing in from somewhere? And I think some of the skill sets that are required are not necessarily embedded yet. So I think the shift is going to be there. And I think, again, especially in some traditional industries like law, where it was about, sit right at the next desk of your partner, and so forth. Even those industries have shown that you can actually work quite productively remotely. And so, again, when you're fighting for talent and for great talent, the ticket to play has certainly got a longer list of requirements on it now.
I think, Pierre, that's really interesting, and just building on that and what Bernadette said about the listening skills as being one of those skill sets we have to develop. How do you think most organisations and most leaders rate in terms of their listening skills?
That's a loaded question.
I was thinking exactly the same.
No, look, I think it's quite interesting, and I think it's also the ability to really try and use data as much as you can. So even now, when we're talking about how do we really effectively bring people back, and get the maximum use out of whatever facilities we have. There's a lot of opinion that floats around, and I think leaders who are really good at going, well, let's actually ask our people. Let's try and get. I know we're all being over surveyed at the moment, but let's try and get some data. What are people saying? So for us, that was actually a key part of what we did is actually going out to every employee in our organization and saying, how would you prefer to work? And then actually talking about at that team level, actually having conversations and making time available for people to really go through the nuts and bolts of it, because it's one thing to put out a policy or have an intention or an ambition, but the rubber really hits the road into those daily and team interactions. And if people aren't bought into that, it's not really going to work. So I think leaders need to listen, but they also need to use data, and they need to actually engage their teams in the decision making. I think leaders who sort of just make a decision in a bubble are going to get found out pretty quickly in the kind of world that we're moving towards.
Lynn, your question is a link to the next slide that I wanted to highlight. And again, this is research from McKinsey. There's a lot of research out there, but I thought this was a really useful visual. What McKinsey were doing, were asking two questions, or one question actually, one set of questions, but to two different audiences, one to the employees and one to employers. And what they were trying to do was assess, how well do employers really understand the drivers of attrition for employees? So what you're seeing here is that in response to the question, what's keeping you, in your work, employee, or what are the drivers of attrition for you is, am I valued by my organization? Do I have work-life balance? Am I valued by my manager, which is a theme that's come up quite strongly in our conversation? Do I have a sense of belonging? Now, interestingly, McKinsey's research shows that the employers had a different set of responses. What was most important from their perspective was work-life balance, but it was also things like compensation, health. The employee probably is looking for a better job. So what their conclusions was, first of all, employers seem to overlook the relational elements that are key drivers for why employees are leaving, such as the lack of belonging or feeling valued at work. And that employers, they also over-index on transactional or external factors like job hunting or compensation, which actually aren't primary drivers. So the conclusion is the same conclusion I think that we are zeroing in on in this conversation, which is that we need to focus much more on the employee experience and relational elements, because these call it the structural factors like pay and working models as table stakes. I'll leave that visual up there just for a little bit longer so you can take it in. But Pierre, what do you think?
Yeah, I was gonna just say, this is an example of probably what I was trying to get to earlier is, if you look at some of these decisions, I can imagine some senior executives sitting around a table going, what are the things that we think are problems personally, potentially, as well as, what do we have control over? And sometimes there's this whole approach to problem solving where people often over-index the solution. They often think that they need a very big solution to a very big problem. And actually, it often isn't. There was a story about trying to get people in rural Africa to get vaccinated against smallpox and polio and things like that. And they found that the solution wasn't a multi-million-dollar campaign of education and flying people all over the place. It was a $1 bag of lentils, because people would walk to the vaccination station to get a free bag of lentils. That was more of a driver of their behavior. So the solution to the problem didn't have to be as big as the problem presented itself. And I think if you're going to leaders with a solution to say, hey, you want to know how you can fix your retention issues? Just spend some time with people, build a personal connection, demonstrate trust. I think there's many leaders out there who might go, but what else can I do? Like, surely that's not enough. But actually, that is what people are looking for. So again, looking at data points like this to inform your decisions, to think about how, not just for your organization, but you as an individual leader are choosing to behave and where you're investing your limited time. It's really interesting to look at a data point like this and say, how's it going to influence my decision making, or what I'm going to recommend for my organization if I'm in an HR type role.
So it does come back to listening. Bernadette, what stops managers from listening? Is it the reality of professional life, the speed of execution, which means that, yes, my intent as a leader is that, of course, I want to listen to each of my team members. The reality is that fits into the important but not urgent quadrant, if you know what I mean.
So it's one of those things that you have to be sort of consciously on your own back about as a leader, because it's easy to get so distracted by task, or so distracted by the next meeting, or distracted by demands from left, right, and center. So it's one of those things that you kind of need to consciously coach yourself to continuously do. And we're all human, right? We're all human. We all come under pressure. We all have all of these demands on us sucking up time. So it's just, we can't not listen enough. But it is hard. It's hard to squeeze that in when you've got so many other demands on your time.
Lynn, you brought up the issue of listening. Have you ever seen examples where, you've cracked the code, where someone wasn't a good listener and you kind of shifted the dial significantly?
Yeah, so at a, you can do it at a sort of programmatic level, and you can do it at an individual level. Often at an individual level, it's just a case of getting the feedback and holding the mirror up so they can see actually your perception of what you think is listening and your team's perception of what is listening, is sometimes there's, quite a big gap. So the ability to give people awareness of how they are perceived and how they are received by others is quite important. At a program level, if you've got a sort of big challenge across your organization, often it's just what does it look like? What does good listening look like? And then helping people or skilling people to do that, listening versus, some people actually have a sort of slightly disconnected view of what good leadership is, and being very directive as opposed to listening and coaching. And of course all of those are contextual, so you can do it at both levels, individual and a sort of cross-organizational. They're just very, very different responses in terms of how you shift behavior and how you shift knowledge and how you shift people's perceptions.
I'm very much with Bernadette on that. I think the holding up the mirror can make a great difference at an individual level, and then programmatic solutions can also help. I think there's one other thing that really can be impactful, and that's, for want of a better word, systematizing ways and means of doing this. And by that, I think, if you're having processes where it becomes part of your behavior, becomes part of your routine, whether that's performance discussions or whether that's career development discussions, it becomes part of the way you do work. And so the listening becomes an embedded skill. But it's one of those things I think actually needs teaching for many people. I don't think it's an easy skill.
Okay, look, I want to share with you the final piece of research. This is a summary of the research out there at the moment on, as well as our own experience as a business, as SMG, what are the factors that attract and engage? Now, we've covered most of these in our conversation already, but let me walk you through them, because at the end of this, I do want to ask you in the audience, which of these factors do you think have the greatest impact? So these are questions that organizations need to be asking themselves. You can see the first one. Do we have leaders who lead with compassion and empathy and really connect with people? Do leaders have the management skills to lead in a hybrid work environment? It's a new set of skills that are evolving and emergent, and we need to know, well, what are they? What are the ones that are the most important? We've covered some of them in the conversation, but do our leaders across our business know how to manage in this new environment? Is our work environment transactional, or are we taking a whole of person approach to individuals? An example of that is that, if we are pulling the lever of a pay increase for someone who's considering leaving, that's a transactional relationship right there, rather than, as we've been discussing, taking a whole of person approach, which includes listening, which considers the person's well-being, their context, their family context, their care context. Are our benefits aligned with the needs of our people? And one of the benefits that I've come across recently, which has had a profound effect, is when organizations give discretionary or additional leave days. Here you go, have 5 days of leave days, because we've been through a lot. That seems to be having a huge impact for organizations or team members at the moment. Are we providing meaningful career development pathways? Which we've been speaking about in this conversation. And then the final one, are we providing a sense of community? There's this adage of individuals join organizations but leave leaders or leave managers. But when there's that sense of community within an organization, there's a gravitational pull to stay within an organization. So here's the poll question, which will come up in just a moment. From your point of view, which of these factors has the greatest impact? Would love to hear your response, and please use the chat function to explain why you've chosen the one that you have as well. Bernadette, let me start with you. Which do you think is the most important?
Oh, it's very difficult to pick one. I think there's a combination it's a bit like the recipe for a decent cake. It's a sort of combination that creates the right impact, and if you don't have the right combination, your cake might not rise. So I'm struggling a bit to sort of pick one over the other. I do like my metaphors, if you hadn't realized already. I would go with 1 and 2 for this moment in time, but you need a bit of 3, you need a bit of 4. 5, I think, is about experiences rather than pathways. I think pathways can create a mismanagement of expectations, but career experiences in terms of building up your ability to lead complexity or to lead change or different things, I think is more important. And yes, a sense of community I can see is relevant, especially as I think somebody is referring earlier on to the importance in a particular, when you're joining an organization or you're learning or you're in a graduate role or you're sort of trying to join an organization for the first time, having a sense of community is really important. As I know, actually, from joining from the UK on Zoom, that didn't give me a whole sense of sort of feeling of having actually ever joined, 18 months later. So sorry, wrong answer, I think, Mehul, that I'm saying it's a cake recipe.
I actually love the cake recipe metaphor, and I think it's so true. My 11-year-old son wanted to make chocolate chip cookies yesterday, but we didn't have enough brown sugar, and it was a major issue. So yeah, you do have to have all the right ingredients for success. Totally agree with that. Lynn, what's your view?
Look, I think Bernadette's taken one for the team on this one because it's pretty tricky. But look, I guess if I had to really narrow it down, I'd probably say tend towards leaders who lead with compassion, because I think at the heart of it, what we're talking about here is human beings dealing with human beings, being with human beings. And I think compassion goes a long way towards helping us understand who we are and why and what's our purpose and where we're going. But I would also have to add, I'm really quite passionate about career development experiences. I'm with Bernadette on that. It's about what are the experiences that can open up opportunities for people. And I think that's a huge part of the whole attrition, attraction, and resignation and retention story that we're talking about here.
Right. Pierre, should we just keep with the cake metaphor?
I do like a good carrot cake myself. But on that note, I think if you really had to single it down to one, I think the word for me I'm also going to break the rules here. I wouldn't necessarily, I think compassion is important, but for me, what's the greatest superpower is empathy. And simply because I think leaders who lead with empathy can do a couple of things really well. Number one, they build immense trust. There's nothing worse than having a team member feels that they can't be open, that you won't understand where they're coming from. And so all sorts of issues get hidden that you can't deal with as a leader. So I think leading with empathy also helps you make really smart decisions. And it certainly has an impact. So even on this conversation we're having here around career experiences, etc., well, leaders who can be empathetic, I would suggest, would be better able to understand that it's not just about going on another course. What you're desperate for as an individual, whether you're a leader or not, but you're looking for those rounded out experiences. You want an opportunity to prove yourself or to advance yourself, and that doesn't always sit with a piece of e-learning or whatever format you pick. So I think for me, compassion, empathy, I think that sort of creates a great nucleus around which you can sort of do the rest. So I don't know which part of the recipe that is. Maybe it's the sugar, but I certainly think that all of these things are really important. And even if you look at that previous McKinsey slide, where there was that disparate view between individuals talking about advancement and leaders talking about development, I think there's something in that around this difference around a career pathway versus an experience, and what are people really calling out for versus what are leaders choosing to be the solution for the problem. So you probably have another whole webinar on that one alone, I think.
Good.
Yes.
Well, looking forward to that one. Let me share with you what those of you joining the call said in response to this poll. And I think what we're saying is actually maybe the question was a little unfair, to single out one. But as you can see, if you listen to the recording, let me actually tell you what we're looking at. Which of these factors has the greatest impact? Number one is leaders who lead with compassion. Let's use that synonymously with empathy. That's 54%. So more than half of the respondents said this is the big ticket item, the most important. The other five are pretty much the same, 27, 29%, equal, which sort of kind of makes that point that they are all important. But picking up in your point, Pierre, leaders who lead with compassion, there's a little bit of a paradox here, because if a leader hasn't been empathetic or compassionate, for 20 years of their leadership career, what makes us think that suddenly they can switch it on now?
That is a really, really good question. And I think look, this probably goes to really pulling back the curtain on myself and my beliefs and my values. But I think that, everyone's got that sense of within their life experience of having been treated unfairly at some stage. And I think, with a bit of whether it's coaching or a different type of development opportunity, holding up the mirror, as Bernadette said earlier, I think you can tease out of people the sort of context behind it. And, I've seen leaders who would not describe themselves as being naturally empathetic, but coming back to those listening skills, there are techniques you can learn that can help you at least demonstrate empathy and have that feeling within the individual. And again, it comes back to that the leader really seeing the value in it. So again, having that conversation around, well, how's this going to impact you? Where's the value in you as an individual leader? But actually seeing how it really can turn on a lot of performance with your team, and really, help you. I think is that book, The Speed of Trust. Work at the speed of trust. I think that there's a lot of value in it. So it is a skill, maybe more naturally, comes more naturally to some than others. But it certainly is one that I feel is certainly important to have in the toolkit.
But is our empathy and compassion, what's the word I'm looking for? Do they work in parallel with delivering results and getting outcomes?
Well, it's an important. So for me, the ability to have empathy and passion helps you make sense of what's required of you or your team, and you can articulate it in a way that is sort of motivating and purposeful. So if you don't have empathy and compassion, it's very difficult to be able to describe the challenges that you have as a team and what you're there to do. So it's absolutely important. You need to be able to pick the right language, say something that is meaningful to your team and is not sort of removed from their reality. So empathy and compassion helps immensely with purpose, with your language, with your communication skills, and also with listening. So you can replay some of the purpose by reusing the sorts of words and the sorts of language that your team is using, and then it becomes much more relevant. So empathy and compassion is critical to listening and then using the right language.
And just building on that, I think there's also this element of it doesn't mean that you have to be soft or seen as sort of, not being able to make decisions, but it certainly helps you understand, it's not the what of the message, but the how. So that to me is, putting it really simply, but it just gives you that sort of superpower of again, thinking about the individual, as their leader, what is it that they need to do to increase, or address an issue or, move to that next level. And so different people need different responses, that idea of treating everyone the same way you wish to be treated. I think it's a lovely sentiment, but often helps you get in the way of being effective as a leader. So I think if you can use it with still the right intent and apply it in the right way, I think it can achieve great things.
Yeah, I don't think empathetic and compassionate means soft. I think it can be tough love too. It's only fair to give people the reality of certain circumstances as well. So I don't see it as tough. I actually think empathy and compassion is hard. It's the hard part of being a leader, not the easy part. Yeah.
So let's.
And that's why that's why I was calling it out there, because I think that a lot of the time that's where the conversation goes. It's seen as a softer skill or something which is more about being nice to someone. So that's why I thought I'd call it out, because I think to your point, Bernadette, it actually is. It's often about the harder way of doing things, but getting a better outcome. So hence my passion for the topic.
I'm with everything that Pierre and Bernadette says, but there's one thing I'd throw in. I'd be pretty nervous if I was doing an assessment of a very senior leader prior to hiring or promoting them, and there were some very low markers around empathy. I'd be a little bit worried. I'm very much of the belief that you can build from your strengths, but that one could be a little harder than others.
Paul Barton on the chat said empathy and compassion would probably be the yeast in the recipe metaphor. Makes everything rise. Yeah, that's great. That's love my metaphor. Lynn, let's just quickly double click on point 5. Are we providing meaningful career development pathways? Because this is your area of expertise now as an executive coach, and you're doing some really interesting work in this area.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Look, I have a fairly strong view. And it's only based on my experience, obviously, but I do think there's a gap in this at the moment. There's a gap in supporting leaders to actually learn how to have really good development conversations, career development conversations. And there's also a gap, I think, in the way that we do them. I mean, it does seem obvious, doesn't it? Career conversation, development plan, it seems very obvious. It's not rocket science, but actually it may be rocket science without the physics. It's actually quite a complex process to do it really well, and it's very much involved with understanding all the things that we've discussed, using compassion, understanding where a person is at a point in time, about understanding what are critical experiences within an organisation that can help people lift their skills, build particular skills, because as people move between levels in a company, if they have that aspiration, there are certain things that they really do have to master and certain things that they really do have to let go. So, I think it's a really large topic. It's an area of real opportunity for many organisations.
Thanks, Lynn. And as part of this webinar, we will be sending you the slides that we've been going through. One of the slides had a lot of data points, so that's available for you to look at in a little bit more detail. We'll also send you a one-page overview of some of the research and work that Lynn's been doing in the area of career development pathways. And that will come to you from my colleague Justine, who's been supporting behind the scenes for this webinar. I'll only take a moment to thank both my colleagues Justine and Chris for your support in this webinar. As we conclude, I want to give the floor back to Bernadette, Pierre and Lynn, sort of 30 seconds each. Let's see if we can hit the 1 o'clock mark. In 30 seconds or less, what's the big big insight or takeaway that you want people to really get from this conversation? Bernadette.
I don't like one answers. You know this, Mehul. I really struggle with one. The importance of the relationship between people leaders and colleagues, whether that's long-term or short-term. And I think a lot of this has been about that's critical. It's critical to the success of the organization. It's going to be critical as we come back into the office, if that's what we choose to do.
Lynn, what would be your summary?
We're in a whole new world, and it's going very fast, and it's moving very fast, and we all need to move fast with it. And I think very much I'd be just really doing the plug for think about how you want to retain the people you want to retain. How do you do that, and what will make a big impact to those individuals, and how will you do it as a leader? And then also think about who else do you want to attract to your organisation? What's the experience you want to give them?
Fantastic. Pierre, 30 seconds.
I'd be saying make sure that you listen to your people, listen to your data, and continuously learn and evolve your response. I think things are going to still continue to change at a rapid pace. What works for us today is not going to be the same thing that will work in February next year or the end of next year. So see this as a continuous learning and evolving situation that's going to require an agile response as you progress.
Great. Pierre, Bernadette, Lynn, thank you for being such engaging panel members, engaging, informative and interesting panel members, I've got to say. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you for your participation. For all of you who have dialed in, and for those of you listening to the recording, thank you for participating, and stay well if you're in Sydney. Enjoy Freedom Day, enjoy getting out and about, and I'm sure it's soon coming for Melbourne as well, and enjoy the rest of the day. Stay well.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.